Hello and welcome to another episode of Political Agenda with me, PJ Thum. I am wearing a blue and white batik shirt and I'm sitting in front of a big shelf full of books. And my pronouns are he, him. Today we've got with us a human rights lawyer and new narrative contributor, Lim Wei Jiet, who is going to talk to us about the ongoing crisis in Malaysia. But before we get to that, this podcast is brought to you by New Narrative, a movement for democracy in Southeast Asia, and we are entirely member-supported. So if you enjoy this podcast, please do join us as a member at newnarrative.com/join or donate at newnarrative.com/donate. And now, Subhash.
Please stay where you are. We've come way too far. Where you think that you're gonna go? This is utopia. Please stay where you are. We've come way too far.
Okay, so joining us today is Lim Wei Jiet, human rights lawyer and new narrative contributor. But before we get to him, as always, my friend, my co-host, Sean Francis Han. How are you today, Sean?
Yeah, I'm doing good. Really excited to get into this intervention here about an issue that's a massive humanitarian crisis and which I think many Singaporeans are unaware of, right? But before we get into all of that interesting stuff, hi, my name is Sean Francis. I'm wearing a grey t-shirt, sitting in front of a grey cupboard, and my pronouns are he, him. So, Wei Jiet, what are your pronouns? What are you wearing? And who are you? Tell us more about yourself.
Right. Hi, everyone. My name is Wei Jiet. I'm wearing a black shirt. I'm sitting in front of a white wall at my house. My pronouns are he, him. I am a human rights lawyer, and I'm also one of the co-founders of the Malaysian United Democratic Alliance, which is one of the very minor political parties in Malaysia, which has not been registered yet, fortunately. But yeah, I've been following the developments politically in Malaysia for some time. I'm keen to discuss in the next few hours.
Okay, so let's just jump right into it. All right, what exactly is happening in Malaysia right now?
All right, in a nutshell, there appears to be a quadruple crisis of sorts in Malaysia.
Okay.
Number one, let me unpack this. Number one, It is a health crisis, obviously, that's similar to many countries across the globe. Number two, there is an economic crisis pursuant to the health crisis. People are losing jobs, the economy is being shut down because of the lockdown, etc., etc. Number three, there appears also to be a democratic crisis where organs of government which are supposed to provide checks and balances upon the executive, such as parliament, is not functioning. And number four, there's a political crisis. There is very huge instability in the ruling coalition and also politics in general because of the hopping of politicians from one coalition to the other. But yeah, I can discuss that in further detail later on. But that briefly encapsulates what's going on in Malaysia.
Okay. Can you tell us the extent of the crisis right now? How is it manifesting? What exactly is going on? Are we seeing protests? Are we seeing strikes? What's going on?
Right. I think in general, people are very fed up with how the government is being incompetent in handling the crisis thus far. We saw 1 million cases this past few days being hit in Malaysia. We see 200 plus deaths a day because of the pandemic. We see an ailing economy that is not receiving sufficient assistance from the government. We are seeing children lagging behind in education because of flip-flopping education policies, no IT devices given to rural children to access education. So in general, people were willing to give a chance at the very beginning when this government took power very unceremoniously, I might say, back last March. But as time passes by, we see failures at every juncture and people are just fed up. And I can tell you that but for the pandemic, people will be on the streets by the millions demanding this government to resign. But obviously, we don't want to burden the frontliners and everything. So, the protest comes in many forms. On social media, people are hanging out black flags to symbolize the government's failures. People are having convoys with black flags to, comply with SOPs to prevent this virus from spreading, but also to make a point that we cannot stand this any longer. And on 31st July, I made to understand that there will actually be a physical protest in Dataran Merdeka, the Independence Square, where several NGOs have decided that enough is enough. We have to show this government that they have to buck up or they have to resign. And that is the manifestation of all the kind of discontent that people are having now at this juncture.
You mentioned the black flags, but that was a response to the white flags, right? Can you tell us more about this white flag crisis?
Right. So the white flag movement is, I think, sort of ground up as a ground up initiative by several NGOs to, allow people who could not have food or need basic assistance like baby diapers at home to plant a white flag in front of their houses so that those who are in power or those who are capable and are able to can go to their houses directly to help them. And the black flag movement, it's not in response per se, but it's probably driven by the same NGOs and people, but it's another angle to show that the white flags are happening because of the government's failure, and therefore the black flag symbolizes the government's failure and discontent. So that in essence is the relationship.
Right. So the white flags was basically people starving in their homes and unable to access basic necessity, putting out a white flag, screaming for help. How did it get to this? I mean, Malaysia is not a poor country, and how did you end up in a state where people actually have no jobs, no money, no food, and are trapped in their homes, holding out flags, begging for help?
Yeah.
I think for many decades, we are led to believe that Malaysia is relatively abundant and rich in resources, and to some extent we are. But I think that COVID sort of exposed the rot that is already simmering underneath Malaysia when it comes to our economy being dominated by GLCs, which means there is a relatively uncompetitive environment domestically. We are seeing education levels being deteriorating for many decades now, which prevent investors from coming to Malaysia and choosing other countries within the region. All of this has manifested to today, to last year, 2020, where the economy is forced to close. Factories were not allowed to operate. Small, medium enterprises are not allowed to operate. And so people are literally either retrenched or they are forced to close their businesses and sell off their businesses. And there really is no alternative besides the gig economy, maybe, through Grab or Food Panda for food delivery. That seems to be the only industry that is, moving. But the rest of the economy is just failing. And because of the rising cases, our economy has never been fully open and never been allowed to be fully open for since June, July last year. So it's been a year where the economy is open and shut and open and shut. So this kind of instability and uncertainty has really thrown a lot of businesses off the rails, and many people just can't find food on the table anymore. And in terms of food delivery and assistance, the government is either not spending enough of money because they are more concerned about fiscal ratings by global rating agencies, or because of the incompetency in which they channel delivery, whereby sometimes they want aid to be channeled to specific politicians or specific district officers, so that to give an impression that government politicians are the ones that are helping, instead of disseminating it to opposition MPs who probably know their area much better and are able to disseminate it at a much quicker pace. So all of this combined has resulted in people literally surrendering and crying for help and raising a white flag, and that is very unfortunate. I don't think we've ever seen that even in times where the emergency happened, during the communist insurgency even. So I was talking to many of my senior lawyers and friends who have been through, independence, the Japanese occupation, and they've probably never seen this kind of this level of, desperation among the people. So that's where we are today.
Okay, so I want to just jump off of PJ's question here, right? I think it is clear that the crisis has really exploded out of a whole variety of sources and problems, right? And I want to sort of begin unpacking those problems, right? And as you said, this is a quadruple crisis, and expectedly there will be quadruple the amount of problems that were lying in the wait, ready to explode here. But maybe if we can take it one step at a time, we unpack this bit first, right? Where do the democratic and political problems come from, right? I think it's not too far off in recent memory that there were protests. Mahathir came in and made some kind of appearance. So how exactly did it evolve into this? I remember Mahathir sort of being a figure for democracy, or at least a symbol of new hope. How did it all go so wrong?
Right. To really understand what is happening today, a little bit of context is required. So Barisan Nasional was the ruling coalition since independence for Malaysia for 6 decades plus, and they have never been dethroned until 2018. And in 2018, a very historic general election happened, whereby, as you said, Tun Mahathir, the 4th Prime Minister of Malaysia, literally came out of retirement to join forces with his arch nemesis, Anwar Ibrahim, who we all know as a very fiery and charismatic opposition leader for decades already, to unseat Najib Razak, who was implicated in the worldwide 1MDB scandal. I think many people are aware of that. It is on that goal alone that Mahathir was willing to join forces with, his political enemies in the past to defeat Barisan Nasional, and he did so through the Pakatan Harapan coalition, the coalition of hope. And in 2018, they won power. However, within Pakatan Harapan, all doesn't seem too well, because then the issue primarily is within Anwar's party, the Parti Keadilan Rakyat, where there are factions within Anwar's party who are at loggerheads with Anwar and don't seem to think that they have a future if Anwar takes over from Mahathir as Prime Minister. So the plan was that Mahathir would be Prime Minister for 2 years and he would hand over the reins to Anwar Ibrahim. So this faction, including Azmin Ali, the current International Trade and Industry Minister, wanted a way out. And their way out was to join forces with the enemy, so to speak, which included UMNO, who was dethroned by Pakatan Harapan, PAS, the Islamist party, and GPS, the Sarawak-based party. And so in March 2020, a very, very unfortunate event happened called the Sheraton Move, whereby Azmin Ali's faction, UMNO, PAS, and GPS gathered at the Sheraton Hotel in KL. And that marked the downfall of the Pakatan Harapan, because with Azmin Ali's faction departing away from Pakatan Harapan, Pakatan Harapan no longer had a majority in parliament. And Tun Mahathir, for some reason, decided to resign. He said that it's clear that he did not have any majority anymore, and he resigned. The king and the monarch was forced to elect a new prime minister that His Majesty thinks would command the majority of parliament support. And Muhyiddin Yassin, who was from Mahathir's party, Bersatu, was appointed as prime minister. And I should mention that even within Mahathir's party, Bersatu, they were also uncomfortable with Anwar taking over, and they also joined forces with Azmin's faction, and that's where we are today. So the Perikatan National Government was born, led by Muhyiddin Yassin. So, but this coalition is obviously very unstable because even until today, we don't really know whether they actually have a majority in parliament. Because what happened in March 2020 was that no single MP commanded a clear majority in parliament. The king had to go through several rounds of interviews. He eventually appointed Muhyiddin Yassin, but his majority has never really been tested because he did not call parliament for the longest time. So there was no avenue to test whether he has a majority in parliament. And he implemented the emergency. And the emergency basically paralyzed parliament, and parliament couldn't convene. So it's been, 1 year plus since the Malaysian parliament has convened. And even as it had started to convene 2-3 days back, or rather this Monday, there is no voting of any voting of sorts. So Muhyiddin's majority has again not really been tested in parliament. And that's where we are today. So we are in this situation where Muhyiddin Yassin's government, the Perikatan National Government, is fearful that it may fall any day. And that's where we are today. And the focus of this government, in my view, has not really been to tackle the crisis at hand, but to maintain power. And the fear of losing power is distracting them greatly from their ministerial duties. And that manifested and resulted in the health, economic, and democratic crisis that we have today. So the political crisis is really the mother and the cause of all the other crises in Malaysia.
So if I can summarize, you've got an incompetent government which is terrified of losing power, doesn't know if it has a majority in parliament, and so doesn't pass bills, which declared an emergency to hold on to power, and then this past Monday, when it looked like there was going to be a vote on that, suddenly said there was no emergency anymore, which whether that's even legal, no one knows. And then in the meantime, you've got the Sultan now asserting a greater role, trying to act as some sort of democratic balance. And essentially it's an incompetent government which can't pass legislation, but also is terrible at running the country, but no one can unseat them. And also if they're unseated, no one knows what comes after. And so that's basically where your country is.
Yes, in a nutshell, yes, that's the chaotic description of my country. Yes, and you're right in the sense that what happens even if Muhyiddin, let's say, resigns tomorrow or is unseated, there's no MP who can clearly command the majority of parliament to become prime minister. But at least today, unless UMNO decides to join forces with Anwar, which seems very unlikely at the moment. So the only way out is really to, possibly, allow this government to just do what it's doing, and hopefully the pandemic comes under control and a general election happens to allow Malaysians to choose a new government again. But that to me is unacceptable, because as we are now today, the government is failing, and I think that there's a desperate need to remove them and to put in place a unity government or any kind of other solutions in place, but nothing but this government. I think Malaysians are fed up and just want to move on from this sheer, and I would say criminally incompetent government thus far.
So just to clarify, if Mahathir had handed over to Anwar on schedule, I don't know whether he planned to, but even if he had, that other faction in Bersatu, in PH, with Azmin Ali and others, would have walked out and taken the government down with them. So Anwar is basically also a non-starter because he's so hated / feared by a segment of the politicians. So he also cannot and could not have commanded the support of a majority of parliament, even if Mahathir had just handed over to him on schedule.
Right, but it remains to be. I mean, I'm not very sure if Azmin Ali and Bersatu would walk out if Mahathir handed power to Anwar. I mean, the situation would have been a little bit different by then. But yeah, it could possibly also be the case that if Anwar took over in 2 years' time, the same thing might have eventually happened anyway. In 2020, it might have happened anyway. So that's unfortunately where we are, and yeah.
Can I? So I think you've done a wonderful job explaining how this political crisis, really finds its roots with all the political turmoil that's been happening over the past few years. But can I just ask you? So the third crisis that you've mentioned is the democratic crisis, right? How did it get that way? What happened to the checks and balances? What happened to the arms of power that was supposed to keep a hold on everything breaking down? What happened to those things?
Right. Because this government is so fearful of losing power, like I mentioned earlier, they have shut down parliament for the longest of time. And parliament is, as you know, is so important to keep the executive on its toes, to point out the flaws in the system. And indeed, in the past 2 days, we have seen very brilliant performances by opposition MPs pointing out the flaws and the things that the government could improve upon in combating COVID. And I think that the entire opportunity to work together, government and opposition in tandem in this national crisis was not happening. And the kind of discourse and debate was not taking place. The government was on a single track and a single mind. They think that they know best how to handle this pandemic without opposition input at all. And that's where we are today. If only they had allowed room for some kind of bipartisan collaboration, or even to just listen to MPs from across the aisle on how to do things better, we might not be where we are today. And this freezing of parliament got so bad to the extent that, as Dr. Thum mentioned, the royalty and the monarch had to step in to remind the executive to convene parliament as soon as possible. And I mean, in what world does that? I would never imagine that happening. The monarch, who is not supposed to traverse into the political realm, so to speak, was so fed up that they had to come up with statements to sort of condemn the government of the day because they have been shutting down parliament. I mean, that shows the level in which this government is just so paranoid to avoid any kind of scrutiny or accountability. And it's not only parliament. You see the charges made against opposition MPs, which are baseless. You see investigations by police over not only opposition MPs, but any kind of dissent, including from the Black Flag movement, including for, recently there were contract doctors who are on strike because the government is not providing them security in terms of their career. Even they are being hauled out by the police. These are frontliners risking their lives every day to help people in need, and you are calling them to the police station, interrogating them as if they are criminals. I mean, the entire state machinery is just clamping down on all forms of dissent against the government of the day. And that is just really unfortunate. The only silver lining, I would say, is the judiciary, which is now currently led by a Chief Justice whom I think is very fair. And the judiciary seems to be the only organ of state that is providing some kind of effective check and balance against the executive. But beyond that, the Attorney General's chambers, the police force, the immigration authorities, they are all just coming down and clamping down hard. And I'm afraid we are going back to the Barisan National days where, freedom and human rights is just on the decline.
Now, the last major source of this crisis that I can sort of identify or that comes to mind right now is the economic, right? And I think we're all familiar with the 1MDB saga. There have been documentaries out about it, right? But does the economic crisis really begin there? And also, what are the ramifications of 1MDB, right? We hear about it as a scandal, we hear about it as a saga, but how has that tangibly affected the lives of Malaysians? How has it tangibly affected the economy? What are the repercussions of that entire debacle?
Well, I think 1MDB unseated a government who was in power for 60 years. So that's itself sort of is a positive development for Malaysians. But in terms of the negative repercussions, of course, globally, now people would think that Malaysia is a country whereby corruption at the grandest of scales happen. And that may affect investor confidence in Malaysia. And actually, it was very important for the new government which took over from Barisan Nasional to show the world that they are able to prosecute and they are able to charge a former prime minister for the 1MDB scandal and allow the due process to take its course and to show the world out there that, hey, the criminal justice system is working in Malaysia, notwithstanding 1MDB. We know that it was a dark, the dark spot of history that we had to go through, but we are moving on to greener pastures. And at this juncture, no doubt, the 1MDB trial is still ongoing because Muhyiddin Yassin sees Najib Razak and UMNO also as a threat in the future when there are future general elections, because they are really just a government where there's a marriage of convenience, so to speak. So that is where we are. So 1MDB was pertinent in that respect. And 1MDB also, I think to some extent, during Pakatan Harapan's time, triggered a kind of realization in the corporate world that you really need to have good corporate governance installed in place in your board of directors, in your management. So to some extent, those kind of reforms did happen, and Pakatan Harapan wanted to do the right thing. But when Perikatan Nasional took over, that kind of those efforts seem to have derailed and seem to have lost focus, and people were just focusing on the political chaos of the day. So I'm not really sure whether the corporate reforms that followed from the 1MDB scandal, really took place after that. But yeah, I hope I answered your question.
Now, you've taken us through, I think, the devastating effects and the extent to which the health crisis, right, COVID, is wrecking Malaysia. But can you speak a little bit more on how the democratic crisis is wrecking Malaysia? You spoke earlier about doctors being called up, about critics being silenced. Can you tell us some of the most egregious examples of this silencing that's going on, political abuse of power? Can you speak in some specificity about how the state machinery is being leveraged to silence critics?
Right. I think one good example are the contract doctors going on strike in Malaysia. So just to give the brief snapshot, in Malaysia, since 2016, a lot of our medical graduates, when they enter into the medical field in Malaysia and they have to serve in government hospitals for a certain number of years, they are only given a contract for 2 to 3 years, and it is up at the discretion of the government whether they want to extend it or otherwise. And that is very, very damaging to contract doctors because they are paid less, they have less benefits, and they do not have security in terms of their career. They don't know whether they're going to be a doctor by the end of this year or the end of next year. And they don't have a pathway to become specialists, which I think is the ultimate goal which they want eventually, because they're contract doctors. And so many of them are very, very dissatisfied with this situation, and they have to risk their lives daily to fight the pandemic. And so all of this manifested in the strike that is going on, that has gone on this Monday. And I was discussing with some of the organizers before this, and you would never believe the level of threats that these doctors are facing, whereby their heads of departments are warning them that, you know, you'll be facing disciplinary action, you may be dismissed from your position, you may be struck off the medical council, you'll never be a doctor again. You see police, in fact, on Monday in Hospital Kuala Lumpur, which is the main hospital based in KL, there were like 20, 30 police cars patrolling the hospital just to monitor the strike that is going on, as if there's an organized crime that is going to take place in Hospital Kuala Lumpur. So this kind of culture of clamping dissent, of not tolerating any kind of criticism or civil disobedience is happening in Malaysia. And it was not caused by Perikatan Nasional, because our authorities have that kind of mindset for the longest of times. But, you know, these things continue to happen. So that is one example. And the other example is probably back in a few months back, I think, Malaysia Kini, which is a very popular news portal in Malaysia, was charged by the government for contempt of court because the allegation was that because in their comment section they allowed third-party comments which are disparaging of the judiciary, because they allowed that to happen, they are in contempt of court. And contempt of court is a very serious offense which could, you know, land you in jail, imprisonment. And that was argued at the federal court. The federal court found them to be in contempt of court. Fortunately, the director or the CEO got off with merely a fine and did not go to jail. But I remember the fallout from that decision, whereby even the embassies in Malaysia, I remember the US or the UK embassy, saw it fit to issue a statement condemning that judgment to hold Malaysia Kini in contempt, because they were fearful that even social media sites like Facebook or Twitter, will they also be in contempt if they allow, you know, comments which are disparaging of the judiciary to appear in their posts or comments? Because this judgment by the federal court to hold Malaysia Kini in contempt has sort of opened a Pandora's box, where any kind of, you know, website out there which allows third-party comments which may be disparaging of the judiciary to be at risk of being dragged to court for contempt. And that was something that was spearheaded by the Attorney General under the Perikatan Nasional government when he came into office. I don't know what kind of message he was trying to send by filing that contempt of court, but it's just another example of how they just want to clamp down on the media to not criticize the authorities of the government of the day. And then the third example I would give is Fahmi Reza. So Fahmi Reza is a very popular cartoonist in Malaysia. So he draws caricatures to, you know, tease and make fun of opposition, of government and opposition politicians, mostly government politicians. And what he has gone to the police station for merely drawing cartoons which mock the government of the day. And he's being intimidated and harassed on a daily basis. I think that when the very first few times when he was being arrested, the door to his house was being kicked down. So, you know, you see all this kind of intimidation tactics happening under this regime. And really, I would think that that is the democratic human rights crisis that we are seeing today. And because of the pandemic also, you know, things such as freedom of assembly cannot be realized because, you know, we are under lockdown, and that has very, very negative repercussions, I believe, because an assembly is often the most effective way in which the people show displeasure against the government of the day. There are things that you can achieve through an assembly, which you cannot achieve through social media. And being a Bersih participant in the past, Bersih was a coalition for free and fair elections, which had massive protests in Malaysia in the past. It really is a very different environment to be able to see your fellow Malaysians, to know that you are not alone in this struggle. Is just turbocharges your enthusiasm and your drive to go to the next level in terms of fighting for the cause you believe in. And I think that because of this pandemic and the kind of clampdowns that we are seeing happening, I'm just afraid that we are sliding back to where we are 20, 30 years back. Because I was so hopeful when Pakatan Harapan took over in 2018 that you would see, Malaysia finally breaking its chains of the past, so to speak, to a more democratic and free society. But it's just so unfortunate that, Sheraton had to happen and all this had to happen. And here we are today. I would never have imagined that when I spent hours voting in 2018, that this is where Malaysia will be 2 years down the road.
So I think you've done an amazing job of explicating to us the health crisis, the economic crisis, the democratic crisis, and the political crisis. And yeah, I think we have a pretty good picture now of the very, very horrendous and horrific situation that is going on just a few kilometers away from us, right? Very, very nearby those of us who are in Singapore. How then do you think that this situation will continue to develop in the coming weeks and months? Do you see a way out? Are you hopeful? How do you think this crisis will progress?
To be honest, I'm not very hopeful that this government will be forced to resign or be unseated, mainly because I think that there is no clear alternative to Muhyiddin Yassin, the Prime Minister. Until the COVID numbers come under control, it doesn't seem to be the case that a general election would come in the near future soon. The only saving grace for Malaysia is our relatively rapid vaccination drive of late. So I think that by August or September, I think the government aims to have every adult in the Klang Valley vaccinated, or at least have one dose. And I think that they are reaching their target, and those numbers seem to be reaching. And so the vaccination is the only thing that will probably bring us out of this health crisis that we are facing today. But beyond that, when it comes to the political crisis, unfortunately, I really don't see any silver lining. Not unless UMNO or Barisan Nasional within Perikatan Nasional decides to join forces with UNWA and Pakatan Harapan. That is a possibility. We never know what will happen. But at this juncture, that doesn't seem to be very likely. And so from what I can observe, what will probably happen is that the vaccination rates will be up, the number of deaths will be hopefully a little bit lower, and when the COVID numbers are under control in 2022 or 2023, then a general election will happen and Malaysians will be able to choose who to lead them again. That is a likely scenario.
Gosh, but on Monday, right, we're recording this on Tuesday, 27th July. So yesterday, the government abruptly declared that the emergency was over. So surely Parliament has to sit again, and surely now there have to be votes on bills which the government can be defeated on. And surely at some point they have to do a supply bill, a budget. And if the government loses that, then that's, by convention in Westminster Parliament, that's seen as a motion of confidence. So you don't see any hope that there will be a vote in Parliament which clearly demonstrates that Muhyiddin doesn't have the confidence of Parliament.
Right. So the thing is that, yes, I think just to correct a little bit, the ordinances under the emergency are said to have been annulled by the Minister of Law. not the proclamation of emergency. So the proclamation allows ordinances to be enacted. So there's some kind of legal distinction there, but but the point remains that the government of the day seems to have given the signal that the ordinances which suspends parliament will no longer be enforced. So in light of that, what Muhyiddin can probably do is to because the thing with Malaysia, and similar to Singapore, I believe, is that the government of the day has full liberty to fix the schedule of parliament. So he could very well, not fix a lot of dates for bills and debates to take place. And that's what he did in the past. He only had one session to comply with the constitutional requirement that parliament must sit every 6 months. And he just, left, and he just did not summon parliament after that. So that's how they play around the rules to their advantage. But you are right that there will come a point eventually by the end of the year where they have to pass the budget, because without the budget you can't really function for the following year. If you look at the trend in the past, Muhyiddin actually managed to pass the budget. I think for last year, I believe. So it's because he did not have an outright majority, but the opposition also could not amass a number to defeat the bill. So the bill was eventually passed. So I suppose what I'm trying to say is that, yeah, Muhyiddin is fearful, but when push comes to shove, he may just have one or two more MPs over and above the opposition. He may just be able to pass the budget or whatever bills that he wants by the skin of his teeth. So he will still remain in power, I think. I hope that answers your query.
Yeah, thank you. But what role does the head of state have, the Agong, in this? What can the Agong do? And does he have any sort of ability to force any kind of change? Could he, for example, does he have the right to dismiss the prime minister and try and find a new one, or can only the prime minister do that?
Right. So under Malaysian law, the king actually has the power to request a sitting prime minister to resign and to appoint a new prime minister. That legal precedent happened because of the Perak case that happened in 2008, where the Pakatan Rakyat Coalition then was unseated by Barisan Nasional in the state of Perak, and the federal court held that the Sultan can actually ask a sitting chief minister to resign and appoint a new chief minister. I don't believe that is the correct way in which you appoint or select a new prime minister. I do think that you eventually need to go back to parliament, and parliament needs to very transparently put the matter to a vote to decide whether this prime minister has lost confidence, because you don't want the king to have this unchecked power to say that, oh, person A has lost the majority without actually having the evidence that that person has lost the majority. So you don't want to hand that kind of arbitrary power to the monarch. But that being said, the status quo is that seems to be the case, that the king can do that. But will the king do that is another matter altogether. I think that from the past statements issued by the palace, the king seems to still have confidence in the government of the day. So unless Anwar or any other MP out there is able to very clearly show that they have the majority to take over from Muhyiddin, the king, in my view, is likely to maintain status quo. So that's where we are today.
Right, thanks. So just to clarify, that right, can Parliament reject? Because in a Westminster system, we accept the supremacy of Parliament. If the king decides to dismiss the prime minister, theoretically, can the Parliament then vote to stop that, or or have no confidence in whoever the king appoints or invites, and vote to bring back the old prime minister? Or could the prime minister then simply have a no confidence motion in the king? Or are there any sort of constitutional checks and balances against that king's power?
Right. So in the event the king chooses a prime minister whom parliament thinks does not command the majority, I think what parliament theoretically can do is to, hold a motion of no confidence against that particular prime minister and to see whether that succeeds or otherwise. And that leads to where the other problem that we have today with our parliament. We have a speaker of parliament who is, for want of a better word, just completely beholden to the prime minister of the day. And there were countless motions of no confidence that the opposition MPs were trying to table, but the speaker was just not allowing that to be on the agenda of the day. So that has happened for since last year. And even today, we see on Monday where this law minister said that, as you mentioned earlier, the ordinances of emergency have been annulled, and that seems to be a shocking development because no one knew that beforehand. He just blurted out in parliament. And today, when opposition MPs are demanding the Minister of Law whether that decision to annul had been gazetted or had received the consent of the king, he was being evasive and he said that I will answer on next Monday. And the speaker just allowed him to do that. The speaker did not compel the minister to answer. He was clearly protecting the government of the day and allowing this kind of ministers to get off on a very, very important constitutional and legal issue that required an urgent answer there and then. So the other crisis which I forgot to mention earlier is really the Speaker of Parliament not standing up to defend the role of Parliament as a check and balance against the executive, and is just more than willing to play the executive's game and to serve their agenda and cause, and not Parliament's cause as a arm of government that checks upon the executive.
If I remember correctly, this speaker was controversially appointed, right? The Pakatan Harapan government had appointed a speaker, and then their speaker was very controversially unseated in a move that was also of very dubious sort of constitutionality.
Right. I think Pakatan Harapan appointed Arif Yusof, who was he was not a politician. He was a former judge of the Court of Appeal, I believe, as Speaker of Parliament, and he was widely respected. And there was an issue on him being removed unconstitutionally, but for the life of me, I can't remember the kind of issues that arose then. But I just know that it was quite controversial, and it was quite unceremoniously done. But the thing is, Arif Yusof had the decency and integrity to allow the motion to remove him to be tabled. And I don't think that this same speaker, Azhar Harun, will allow that to happen. And that's the difference in character that we are seeing today. Yep.
Well, that's always the problem, right? The Democrats have to play by the rules, right? And by Democrats, I mean people who believe in democracy. And the people who don't can abuse the rules against them.
That's why Democrats and progressives always lose, unfortunately.
But the moment Democrats and progressives adopt the tactics of the anti-democratic people, they no longer stand up for the values they believe in. And so, oh gosh.
Yeah, that's the paradox that we have. Yep.
On another note, though, I'd like to bring the discussion, I think, back into sort of Singapore, right? And ask the question here, which is, really, what then is the responsibility of Singaporeans here in this crisis, right? As a country that has, for the most part, I think, dealt with the pandemic decently well, that is not in a humanitarian crisis, that is really a neighbor to Malaysia. What is the role or responsibility that you think Singaporeans or the Singapore government has?
Well, hopefully not or pity, but probably I think the message that probably I hope Singaporeans can send to Malaysians is that, to just hang in there, and that the better days will come eventually. And this is that the failures that you're seeing in the system is not entirely your fault, but you have a government of the day which came into power through unscrupulous means, and we are stuck in this situation. And to just give us that kind of moral support, I think that a lot of Malaysians are very disheartened and disillusioned of this country. And I think for the very first times in my life, I've heard of friends wanting to, move overseas, and because they really don't see a future in Malaysia, even if this pandemic comes under control, because of the rot in the economy in terms of governance and democracy. But I still do think that there is hope for Malaysia, and I think that the message to just hang in there and stay on, and will hopefully help Malaysians over here. Yep.
Are there NGOs you mentioned for the white flag crisis that Singaporeans could donate to or offer support to?
I apologize, but I can't remember the exact name of the NGOs. But
It's okay.
I'll let
We
you
can
know
research it later, and then we'll put it in the show notes. So anyone listening or watching, if you look below in the show notes, you'll be able to see a link.
Yep.
If I can offer a different sort of perspective, though, what we're seeing is a country, a rich, prosperous country, which has a parliament which is not fulfilling its constitutional duty to scrutinize the executive or act as a check and balance. We have misallocation of state funds to prioritize party purposes rather than national purposes. We've got the use of lawsuits against critics, the use of the law to harass, to intimidate the people who criticize the government or activists or the media, right? We have a lack of basic freedoms, such as a lack of the freedom of assembly, freedom of speech, right? All these things also describe Singapore. And they described Malaysia, I think, 20, 30 years ago, but the difference then was and Singapore also had an authoritarian leader who was also very competent. But when you end up with a government that is incompetent, then everything falls apart very quickly. And all these tools which the authoritarian competent leader used to boost growth in the economy and raise living standards for everyone suddenly become tools for the incompetent government to abuse power. So I think the main lesson for Singapore is actually, to not pity, but to look at Malaysia and realize that if we don't democratize and have proper transparency and accountability and checks and balances, it's very easy to go from being a decently run, prosperous country to a poor one in the middle of a quadruple crisis, just like that, right? And in this day and age, I think we recognize there's going to be more crises. There may be another pandemic, but we also have the slow-moving climate crisis that's happening, and all these things are going to require good, competent leadership, and there's no guarantee of that. So we got to have democratic protections and checks and balances.
Right, I totally agree with you. I think that if there's any one lesson that Singapore can take from Malaysia's crisis today is to, like you said, reform the institutions out there to have independent Inspector General Police, independent Attorney General, independent judiciary, a relatively independent parliament, to all provide scrutiny and checks and balances upon the executive of the day. And I think that is so supremely important, because only when the executive is in check will it produce competent results at the end of the day. And I think that that's something that it is a huge lesson, and I think that Malaysians themselves realize this. I'm not very sure that will happen.
So, which I just have one last question for you right here, and that is, if there was one thing right now that you could change, right, one political move, one move that activists can make or have made that has really worked, that has really begun to change things, what would that be?
Something that has already taken place.
Either already taken place and that has worked very well, or something that you would like to see happen from activists, lawyers like yourselves, and other people engaged in this fight against this, very tyrannical government. Yeah.
I think one of the very, very important achievements that activists managed to do is to lower the voting age from 21 to 18 years old. And I think that that's something Singapore has not managed to be able to do.
I'm caught a little bit left field. I'm caught a little bit off guard by that, because the problems that we're talking about are quite far away from this. So yeah, I'm very interested. Yeah, the voting age.
Right. I think that the voting age, lowering the voting age, really is an important milestone. And also represents my hope for the younger people out there in Malaysia, because I do think that it is the younger generation that will take Malaysia out of the crisis that we are seeing today, because I do feel that one of the other causes of this crisis are old male politicians dominating the political sphere in Malaysia and not allowing the young people to take over. If you look at cabinet today, no one is below 40. If you look at parliament today, there are only 2 MPs which are lower than 30 years old. And these MPs, people like Syed Saddiq, they bring energy, they bring creativity in what they are doing, in how they serve the people. And I think that they represent the hope that Malaysia, the hope that Malaysians can hopefully achieve one day. And I do think that lowering the voting age allows more younger people to take part in the democratic process, and inevitably allows younger ideals and the aspirations of the younger people to be better reflected in policies of the day, which hopefully translates to young people coming into power. And I do think that is the way forward, and also of course, also having more female politicians to be installed in power. And I think that lowering the voting age from 21 to 18 will change the course of the game in Malaysia for the next few decades, because we are looking at a whole different demographic altogether. 3 million plus people will enter into the voting roll. We don't know how they will vote. We don't know what kind of policies and ideals that they aspire for. And so it's really interesting to see how political parties are able to tap into it. But regardless, I do think that is probably something that will bring Malaysia into somewhere better off, hopefully, in the next few decades.
I have to say, I didn't expect that answer, but I am so 100%. So thank you.
More diversity, more representation. Amen. So thank you so much for your time, Wei Jiet. We really appreciate it. And I know I speak for all Singaporeans when I say that we hope Malaysia will find its way out of this crisis. We are, Singapore and Malaysia have had a lot of differences over the years, but ultimately we are intertwined and interdependent. And I know that a well-run democratic Malaysia can only be good for Singapore and vice versa. And I really hope that, we'll find a way to emerge from this crisis. So thank you very much for your time, Wei Jiet. Thank you very much for all your really insightful and an excellent explanation of what's going on. And of course, as always, thank you to my co-host, Sean Francis. Thanks always, Sean, for excellent questions and being here. And thank you to our listeners and all of you watching on YouTube for joining in. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please do join New Narrative as a member. We need your support at newnarrative.com/join or donate at newnarrative.com/donate. Thank you very much and see you next time.
Stay where you are. We've come way too far. Where you think that you're gonna go? This is utopia. Please stay where you are. We've come way too far. Where you think that
Thanks for watching. If you'd like to learn more about New Narrative, please check out this playlist up here. And if you'd like to watch episodes of Political Agenda, please check out this playlist down here. Thank you very much, and please help keep New Narrative sustainable and independent by joining as a member at newnarrative.com/join. Thank you.